Mr. Pulley here for History of Western Civilization, Fieldcrest High School, looking at medieval to the Renaissance, that sort of transition from the medieval time period to the Renaissance, and we'll be studying the Renaissance separately as its own unit a bit later on. The times are changing in the High Middle Ages and the Late Middle Ages. There's the rise of cities and the money economy. Trade is going back to being money-based. This is, we see the rise of city-states such as Florence in Italy and these trading states dealing with the Mediterranean empires, and things are changing rapidly. We're going to see this benefits the townspeople who fall outside that feudal pyramid and as a result are less under control of the kings or the local lords. And the fact we're going to see kings in a lot of places actually sort of bring these guys under their controls by offering charters to the towns, especially in France and in England. Okay, this is a result, of course, damages the power of the local nobles who are losing power to the kings or losing power to townspeople in general. We're going to start to see the rise of the nation states in Europe as opposed to small little principalities or small little kingdoms. We're going to get kings growing greater in power and nobles in general losing the power they held over their local territories. We're going to see also a crisis in the church from too much abuse. We're going to see something that leads to an undermining of its authority, and as well as that, it's going to create a sort of a general anxiety, because when times change, people get uneasy, and they sometimes look back to the church, but if they don't have any faith in the church because of its abuses, well, that's going to be a problem. Some of those abuses including who's the actual pope. We've got the Great Schism, the Babylonian captivity. We've got popes with kids, all kinds of problems. Also in here is the 100 Years' War. This is between France and England. This 100 Years' War actually lasts about 134 years. Disrupts the government and trade, not just between those two countries, but other regions that they involved in, including places like Flanders, that region between France and Belgium, and generally trade between those areas and the Middle East as well. Okay? There are some new military developments in this time period, which makes the feudal system actually become somewhat obsolete. And part of that problem is that that knight on horseback is going to become less useful on the battlefield than the average foot soldier. This is very similar to what we saw with the phalanx situation back with the ancient Greeks. Okay, these developments include the crossbow, which could, with early iron armor, punch a hole through there when it's initially banned by the Pope. The longbow, introduced by the English archers, that has a rate of fire 6 times greater or more than the crossbow, although it takes a lot more training to become a skilled longbowman than it does to be a crossbowman. We're going to start seeing cannons in the later part of this time period, and also even different types of formations that allow for flanking and different types of things. Okay, the result of this is it robs the nobility of any real reason, or any real role for them in battle. If that heavy armored cavalry guy isn't really needed anymore, that's not a good thing. At the Battle of Agincourt, we're going to see a slaughter of nobles that's going to really weaken their power, because that power goes back generally to the kings. At the Battle of Agincourt, we literally see thousands of French nobility being slaughtered. Also, times there are threats also from the outside in terms of the Turks, even the Mongols, our good friends, as John calls them. Contributions lead to this sense of insecurity among the people in general, okay, which weakens the church, because people are saying, where's God? Why is he abandoning us? Maybe because you slaughtered all those Muslims at Jerusalem. I don't know. There are droughts going on here and crop failures. We're going to see a little bit of a climate change, which earlier on had led to increased food production, and later on a cold snap is going to lead to crop failures. Okay, there's less stuff to trade, and as a result, we got a weakened population. And if that's not bad enough, now that we're all weakened from famine and from crop failures, let's bring in the Black Death. That's the bubonic plague, as well as other plagues as well. Nice picture here. Flandrian region, this is called the Triumph of Death. This is actually, I think, just a highlight from there. Kills many people, up to 75% of the people, depending on where you lived and what part of a city you lived in. Generally speaking, almost half of European population overall is killed. Terrible situation. This disrupts society, and the social fabric is just basically destroyed. People, sense of morality is gone. Their sense of hope, optimism, all these things destroyed. Trade, services completely destroyed. Terrible situation, and it creates this atmosphere of desperation and despair. And in reaction to these changes, well, it differs by classes. Okay, if you're part of the clergy, the peasants, the nobles, whatever, the clergy is sometimes embarrassed by the church problems, and some of them don't like that. Some others, however, become more rigid and judgmental and protective of their rights and privileges and say, don't tell us how to behave, we tell you how to behave. And this is going to contribute later on to the upcoming Reformation, when people say, hey, enough is enough, stop telling us, what to do and do what you're telling us to do. For the peasants, conditions actually improve. Inheritance is getting better because if, someone in my family died and I was going to inherit part of a farm, I now got all of the farm. There's a scarcity of labor. Okay, as the people are killed off, we now start hiring them. So now I can get myself out of serfdom and into the labor force and paid labor force, which is a good thing. Virtually, this results in the end of serfdom in Europe at the time, unless you live in Russia. Okay, townspeople, inheritance increases, and capital production, capital availability helps things, and our markets are increasing. If I had a business with my three brothers, and three of them die, and I inherit the whole thing, instead of getting a quarter of a business, I now get an entire business. There's a bit of a concentration of wealth, okay? There's some economic prosperity. The cities allows for a quick recovery in those regions, farming regions not as quickly. And these, in fact, have become, the wealthiest part of society. The townspeople do. In fact, they're going to see nobles marrying their sons and daughters to wealthy, sons and daughters of merchants in order to get some money. Hey, you bring some money to the table and you guys can become part of the nobility. The nobles themselves, well, these guys sort of try to pretend that nothing's changing here, okay? There's no real hope to revive that feudal system, but they're crushed on all sides in terms of reality and being obsolescent and purposeless. However, they retreat in this sort of fantasy world of chivalry and knights and ladies and, sonnets and stuff. And the problem is they still think the knight on horseback is the ultimate fighter, but in this case, he's not really needed anymore. So the attitudes and values held by the nobles that govern military and daily life, which is that chivalry thing, honor, gallantry, loyalty, courtly love, and generosity, can be seen in both education, and it can be seen in the fact that we have this idea of education-wise a page, a squire, then a knighthood, which is an imitation of the guild system. And then we've got as well this battle for the peace of God, protecting the weak and the poor, although there are fewer of them, then pretty soon they're able to protect themselves, and capitalism is taking over. They go to tournaments to practice jousting and those kind of things, but if they're not relevant in battle anymore, I'm not sure how important that is. And this idea of chivalric love, respecting women, of troubadours singing these songs and writing poems and favors here from the lady here as I go into battle. This is denial of the fact that actually militarily these guys are out of date. They're living, again, as I said, in really sort of a fantasy world. Chivalry, these tournaments are practiced. This is form over function. We're practicing the form, but the necessity of these guys in battle has been greatly diminished. Okay, love is idealized and in fact becomes very unrealistic. We have these high hopes, put women on a pedestal, and guess what? You've got some problems. Okay, they start developing elaborate ceremonies, special artificial titles, special offices, chivalric vows, fantasy literature versus interaction in the real world, and they sort of are ignoring what's actually going on around them. The result of this is there's going to be big changes coming out. That's going to lead to changes that lead to the Renaissance. We're going to see all that coming up later in our next unit, which is on the Renaissance itself. See you then.